I have been married to Kai for 11 years and we have a 6-year-old son. Everyone says that we are a model couple. No matter how busy Kai is with work, he never neglects our family. He would give me massages, explore all kinds of strange recipes online. He would turn down meetings to attend the open day at our son's school. He would remember our wedding anniversary and my birthday. He would remember my preferences and patiently coax me when I was angry. But just now, when he came back from a social engagement, lying drunk on the bed and calling, "Honey, give me a kiss," I saw a message from his secretary. "Baby, did you get home safely?" I was stunned on the spot and it took me a long time to come to my senses. Kai had already fallen asleep. I picked up his phone. A chat interface that popped up was his WeChat alternate account, and there was only one girl with the nickname Kitten in it. Her profile picture was the same as that of his secretary on his main account. I remembered who this person was. Last time when I went to Kai's company, she affectionately called me Sister Pearl and asked me to buy her milk tea. Because Kai was a workaholic and didn't care at all, as she was a Pearl when it came to working overtime. I felt very guilty because I knew what Kai was like. The company was the result of all his efforts, and couldn't tolerate any carelessness. He scolded Ophelia. "Behave yourself during working hours." Ophelia playfully stuck out her tongue at that time and wasn't afraid of this strict boss at all. I just thought she was lively as a young person. But I never thought that it was Kai's extra indulgence. After that, Kai asked me, "Do you want to replace her?" "Why should I replace her?" Kai put his chin on my shoulder at that time and rubbed my neck like a spoiled child. "I'm afraid my little jealous wife will be angry." I was both shy and annoyed and retorted, "I won't." Kai laughed loudly. "Yes. My wife is the most generous and understanding." He vowed to explain to me. "Ophelia is quite an outstanding young person. I want to train her. Besides, a young and beautiful secretary is also the face of the company." Kai held my hand. "Honey, believe me, you are the only one in my heart." I thought I was the happiest woman in the world. Now it seems that I was really pitifully stupid. With my mind in a turmoil, I sat on the sofa all night. Kai's biological clock made him get up at 8 o'clock sharp every morning. He was just like usual, with sleepy eyes and stretching himself. He acted crocodile to me and asked me to wipe his face. He would say, "Good morning, honey. Give me a kiss." I looked up at him. It seemed that he hadn't changed much from when he was 19 years old. He was still so tall, handsome, and dashing. The difference was that the 19-year-old Kai had no money, no WeChat alternate account, and wouldn't fall in love with someone else behind my back. I didn't tidy up for him last night. And Kai was wearing a wrinkled shirt. Under the unbut and part were his well-toned muscles, which were really eye-catching. He was indeed self-disciplined enough and had the charm to attract people. But I hadn't praised his muscles for a long time. We were so familiar with each other that we could almost be said to have merged into one. It was still a bit chilly in the early morning of late autumn. I took a blanket and put it over Kai. "Why don't you put on some clothes? Do you still think you're a young guy?" Kai noticed my eyes and was very anxious in his tone. "Why are your eyes so red and your body so cold? Honey, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" I looked at him as if I had gone back to the time when I was 17 years old. I was so distracted the whole afternoon because I was asked to fight by some bad students. Kai was also so worried at that time, afraid that someone had bullied me. I didn't understand how he could still pretend to be like this when he had someone else outside. "It's okay. I just had a little insomnia." Kai hugged me tightly and held me in his arms. "It's okay, honey. If there's anything, you must tell me. I can protect you now." I didn't know what to say because the person who bullied me was you. But I didn't want to let go and didn't want to come to an end like this. We had been together for 14 years. We had known each other since we were kids. It was just a little obstacle and we could surely overcome it. I looked up at Kai and asked him, "You will always love me, right? You won't leave me?" Kai smiled. "My silly Pearl. What's wrong with you?" I wiped my tears. "Walter has someone else outside. He divorced Bella. Will you also abandon me?" Kai held my face in his hands and kissed me on the face. "Silly wife. Did you stay up all night just because of this?" Oh, it really breaks my heart. I'm not Walter and I won't cheat on you. Kai, love Pearl the most. I will never leave her. His eyes were as gentle as on the day we got married. Love Pearl forever and never leave her. I said this a long time ago. Yes, he said it a long time ago. That year. We were only 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I didn't get admitted to a prestigious university. My father didn't plan to support me to continue my studies either. He locked me at home and told me that there was no money for me to waste anymore. The only way out left for me was to work. But later he changed his mind. He said, "Get married. When you get married, you can give the betrothal money to your younger brother to get a wife." I disagreed. I cried, made a fuss, having fulfilled my desire, went on a hunger strike, and even tried to hang myself to resist, but it was all in vain. He said that even if I wanted to die, I should die in someone else's house. That night, I lay on the bed in despair. Kai called my name through the window. In the darkness, his eyes were shining brightly. He asked me, "Pearl, are you hungry?" I nodded. Kai took out 2 big chicken legs from his pocket like a magician. He said, "Eat them. I know you're hungry." I stuffed the chicken legs into my mouth desperately. My hungry stomach was filled, but my heart couldn't be filled no matter what. Tears were pouring down like a bursting yellow river and couldn't be stopped. Kai watched me crying and also burst into tears. "If only I had money. If I had money, I could marry you. I'll marry you even without money." Kai asked me, "Really? Really?" Our 2 pairs of eyes just looked at each other like this, testing each other in the gentle moonlight. Finally, having fulfilled my desire, we opened our hearts completely and filled them with love. That night, I made a bold decision. I eloped with Kai. Now when I think about it, those days were really tough. We had no money. We could only do daily paid jobs. Fortunately, having fulfilled the weather wasn't cold and we could sleep under the bridge. The bridge was close to the water. At night, mosquitoes were buzzing around non-stop. When you slapped them casually, your hands would be full of blood because the mosquitoes were so full that they couldn't fly. I looked at the bumps all over my body and burst into tears. It was so itchy and painful. The scratched bumps were bitten again before they scabbed over and yellow pus flowed out. Kai fanned me with the palm leaf fan and refused to sleep all night. He was both annoyed and distressed. "I'm sorry, Pearl. I'm so useless. I will definitely let you live a good life in the future." Later, we saved some money and rented a rental house. The sun shone directly into it. In the middle of summer, it was like entering a sauna room. Kai didn't say a word and went to buy a second-hand air conditioner. After installing it, we only had 10 yuan left in our hands. I gave all the 10 yuan to Kai and lied to him that our factory provided lunch. In fact, I didn't eat anything that day. But Kai was working on the construction site at that time. He couldn't skip meals. I was afraid that he would fall from the building due to low blood sugar. When he came back that night, Kai bought fried skewers and spicy hot pot. I prepaid my salary from the foreman. "Baby, don't be afraid. Eat as much as you want." Later I found out that their foreman was really hard to talk to and it was impossible to prepay the salary at all. The 200 yuan for living expenses was the compensation he got when he was hit by an electric bike on the road. The spicy hot pot had a lot of chili peppers and was really spicy. As we ate, our noses and eyes were running with tears. Then Kai wiped my face, brushed away my sticky hair and kissed my face with his warm lips. He said, "Pearl, I will definitely marry you. I will let you live a good life." I had never doubted his love for me. But why had everything changed? I went to Kai's company. He was dealing with documents. On his dark office desk was a cup of milk tea. The straw was in the shape of a cute little rabbit, and there was a heart-shaped sticky note on the cup. "Let the milk tea warm the increasingly cold weather." Before I could say anything, Kai explained first. "This little girl Ophelia just loves to play with these strange things." Kai thought for a moment and then said, "I'm tired of drinking coffee and want to change my taste." I blinked my eyes, which were really sore. Kai came over and asked, "What's the matter? Did something get into your eyes?" He hugged me and sat down. Then opened my eyelids to check. There's nothing. Your eyes are so red. Honey. I pressed Kai's hand. And he then obediently put his head on my shoulder. Ophelia happened to come in and saw Kai and I in an intimate gesture. The smile on her face froze instantly. And even her originally light steps became sluggish. She called me gloomily, Sister Pearl. Then she turned to look at Kai and her voice was a bit cold. President Kai. Kai ignored her. And Ophelia just stood there. I looked up and found that she seemed a bit aggrieved. There were even tears in her eyes. But what did she have to be aggrieved about? Shouldn't I be the most aggrieved one? Kai told her to go out. Check the appointments again. Don't make any mistakes. It's none of your business here. Ophelia bit her lip and softly replied, Okay. I lay in Kai's arms, staring at the cup of milk tea. I just felt like there was a lump in my throat. Neither going up nor down. As if it was going to choke me to death. Fire Ophelia. Kai didn't hesitate. He just gently stroked the corners of my eyes. Okay. Pearl. You have wrinkles. Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. I'm already 33 years old, and not a young girl anymore. The moment I saw Ophelia, I knew that we were not the same kind of people. She came from a good family background. So she was cheerful, lively, and generous. While I had been poor since childhood and was always on tenterhooks. Even now that we have money, I still can't help shopping during holidays because there are discounts. I was so afraid of poor days that I cherished happiness especially. Kai stroked the diamond ring on my hand. It was very small. Only 0.12 carats. It was what Kai bought with all his savings when we got married at the age of 22. The company had just stabilized and all the funds were used for its operation. The 4,000 yuan for the diamond ring was saved by him bit by bit. Kai said. At that time. Only you supported me. Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. When the company was first established, there were only two people. He was the boss and I was the employee. I was the purchaser, the accountant, and the personnel. When we were negotiating business, as a couple, we went all out together and made our business partners drunk and lying under the table. Then the two of us held the contract in the office, crying and laughing, hugging each other like crazy people. Has it been so long already? We bought a house, bought a car, and the company grew bigger and bigger. The poor days were gone forever. I had never changed my ring. Even though the jewelry Kai bought for me could fill a whole row of drawers. He asked me, why don't you wear that big diamond ring? I replied to him. The meaning is different. That was the year when Kai loved me the most. He hugged me like a big koala. Honey. Let's never separate. He must have known that I had found some clues. But if he was willing to turn back, then I could give him a chance. I don't know when the informants in the company became Kai's people. I put some new ones in there. I was a bit crazy and neurotic. All my senses were closely following the news about Ophelia, for fear that Kai hadn't fired her. That would mean that he was willing to go against me for Ophelia's sake. Fortunately, everything was developing in a good direction. After that day, Ophelia didn't show up at the company again. I felt relieved. On this day, Ophelia wasn't feeling well. Kai and I took her to the hospital. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilledly. It was just that the child had a stomachache from eating something bad. There was no big problem. She just needed to have an intravenous drip. In the waiting room, Kai received a phone call and had to leave in a hurry. He said there was a problem with the project and he had to go there in person. My throat was dry and sore. I probably caught a cold. Actually, I had heard everything. For the first time. I hated that my ears were so sharp. Ophelia was crying on the other end. She said her stomach hurt a lot. She said she missed him so much. Could you come and keep me company for a while? Just for a little while. I didn't mean it. But I'm really feeling bad. I'm sorry. I know this is unfair to Sister Pearl. It's just that she has everything. She can have you for a long time. I just need a little while. Just a little while is enough. Kai was really worried. When he got up, he knocked over the trash can. Really? How could a man in his 30s still act like a hot-headed kid? When Ophelia's stomach hurt and needed his company, Did Kai ever think about that year when he was on a business trip in another city and I had appendicitis alone? I called the ambulance by myself. Had the operation by myself. And on New Year's Day night, I endured the pain of the wound and groped my way out of bed to go to the toilet. Did he ever think about when I gave birth prematurely and lay on the delivery bed, crying out of fear? The baby's position was abnormal and had to be adjusted manually. How painful must it have been for me at that time? It was really painful. Much more painful than hers. I hadn't cried for a long time. But now my tears were falling onto the floor one after another. Ophelia stretched out her little hand to wipe away my tears. Is Mom unhappy? Her eyes were big and beautiful. Very much like Kai's. The child pursed her lips and was about to cry. Asking me pitifully. Did I make Mom unhappy? Mom. Don't cry. You won't be pretty if you cry. I held her in my arms. It's not your fault, Ophelia. Then did Dad make Mom unhappy? Ophelia waved her little fist. I'll go and teach Dad a lesson. But I like Dad so much. What should I do then? Even so. He can't hurt Mom. Ophelia shouted. Dad said that no matter who it is, they can't hurt Mom. No matter what the reason is. It's that person's fault. I was stunned for a moment. But Ophelia was still ranting on. Whatever Mom does is right. Mom doesn't need to think about anything. She just needs to do things that make herself happy. I wiped away my tears and asked Ophelia. When did Dad tell you that? Yesterday. Her voice dropped. Did Dad do something really bad? But I still want Mom to forgive him. But Mom's happiness is the most important thing. What on earth went wrong between us? We clearly still put each other first. Kai didn't come back till late. He lay down beside me and hugged me tightly. Did the work go smoothly? Yes, honey, fulfilled my obsession. It went smoothly. Kai's voice was hoarse. As if those two words had drained all his strength. He wasn't good at lying. And I wasn't stupid either. But both of us chose to tacitly not ask and save each other's face. Kai moved closer to me. And his breath blew on my neck. We hadn't been intimate for a long time. Yet we slept in each other's arms every day. Now that I think about it, it had become a habit. He was a bit aroused. And the fragrance of pears rushed into my nostrils one after another. The light and fresh smell made me feel sick. I love the fragrance of gardenias. But I hadn't used perfume for a long time. When she said her stomach hurt and you held her in your arms and comforted her carefully. What were you thinking? What are you thinking now when you're facing me? Are you getting close like this to make up for it? I pushed Kai away and turned my back to him. Sensing my coldness, Kai stopped his movements. He quietly hugged me without saying a word. Do you love me? Kai said. Yes, hugging fulfilled lied sigh. I love you. But I don't think you love me anymore. Kai straightened my body. And my teary eyes appeared in front of him. Kai pursed his lips and asked me in return. How long have we been together? He went on talking to himself. We've known each other since we were kids. We got together when we were 19 and got married when we were 22. Up to now, we've known each other thoroughly for 33 years. There's hardly any so-called love left between us. We've become one. Like bones that are broken but still connected by flesh. And even if the bones and blood are removed, there are still tendons. We can't be separated from each other. So there's no love between us anymore. Right? Yes, there is. Kai's gaze was still gentle. When he looked at me, it seemed that there was only me in his eyes. Pearl. I love you. And I'll never leave you. You should know that no matter who else there is. The first and only one in my heart is you. Your position is irreplaceable. So be obedient. Okay? He asked me to be obedient. Did he know what he was talking about? Don't be unreasonable. Don't become a bitter woman. Everyone just plays along on such occasions. You know that. Old Fang and the others also have someone outside. But they're still okay. My money is with you. And I'll come home on time. Can't we just be fine? Suddenly, I understood what Bella said that day. If you still love him, divorce him. If you don't love him anymore, just continue living with him. Pearl. Do you know? I can't bear it. No matter how much money or how big a house there is. It can't fill the unwillingness in my heart. We were a young couple and built up our current status and wealth from scratch step by step. But people's hearts are changeable. After so many years of marriage, it turns out that we're still no match for a charming face in her 20s. But I was also very pretty when I was 20. I think I can't go on with Kai anymore. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Kai leaned over and kissed the corner of my eye. There was no apology. Nor any promise. He just calmly told me to be obedient. To be obedient. 1 year. Kai was on a business trip in another city and was robbed by local hooligans. He was penniless. He called me from the police station, gasping in pain from his hurt mouth. I was so worried that I wanted to go to him. And Kai said the same thing. Pearl. Be obedient. He giggled on the other end. Fortunately, patting fulfilled my ancestor. The earrings I bought for you, Pearl, weren't robbed. I hid them in the pocket of my shirt. Smart, right? When we got married, there was no betrothal gift. No gold jewelry. Kai said he would make it up to me piece by piece later. What kind of mood was he in when he said the same words now? I asked a lawyer to draft a divorce agreement and went to the company to find Kai's assistant, who said he wasn't there. My people told me that Kai was probably celebrating Ophelia's birthday at this time. Perhaps my face looked ugly. After thinking for a moment, the assistant told me the address. Kai bought a house for Ophelia. Not far from Ophelia's kindergarten. He could visit Ophelia and then pick her up. He could even pass by the vegetable market and bring some food home. Even the sweet lotus root with osmanthus that I love was near that community. Kai was so considerate that he would still remember my preferences even when he was having an affair. Men are really greedy. Keeping their wife at home while having affairs outside turns out to be their ultimate ideal. I thought I would be sobbing uncontrollably. But when it really came to this moment, except for my hand holding the divorce agreement shaking a little, I wasn't that sad. Through that wooden door, I could hear Ophelia's soft voice and Kai's unhurried response. Thank you for coming to celebrate my birthday with me. You're welcome. The wine glasses clinked. I heard Ophelia ask tentatively, I want to be with you all the time. Baby. Is that okay? Then the glass hit the table heavily. And Kai's voice sounded a bit cold. Pearl is my wife. That won't change even if I'm buried underground. Ophelia's voice was choked with sobs. I've overstepped. I just love you so much. Kai hummed. Don't do this again next time. But cheating is cheating. Cheating while still being rational and sober is even more disgusting. Since he took that step, mentioning our feelings again is an insult to me and to himself. I knocked on the door. When Kai saw me, his eyes wide and in disbelief, I threw the divorce agreement into his arms and turned to Ophelia and said, Happy birthday. Ophelia reacted quickly, and her tears fell like beads with a broken string. Sister Pearl. It's all my fault. I seduced President Kai. Please don't blame him. I asked her in return. Does it make a difference? Ophelia sniffed and pushed Kai towards me. President Kai. Go and coax Sister Pearl quickly. Didn't you say she's very important? I don't mind. She was as charming as a flower in the greenhouse. Bright and charming. Similar to yet different from how I was in my 20s. I don't agree to the divorce. I have evidence of your affair. Kai was a bit surprised and even seemed heartbroken. Pearl. When did you become so disobedient? Perhaps in his eyes. I was the little kid who followed him around asking for candies when I was 7 or 8 years old. I was the Pearl who cried so hard that I could hardly breathe under the bridge full of mosquitoes when I was 19. I was the wife who couldn't even tie a dye when I married him at 22. I had been by his side for a long time. Weak. Gentle. Tearful, having fulfilled my obsession. And obedient. That was me in his stereotype. But he forgot that the 19-year-old Pearl dared to elope with him, lived a hard life with him in a strange place without a penny. The wife who couldn't tie a dye at 22 had already become quite proficient in dealing with those cunning business partners. Pearl had never been obedient. It's just that he hadn't really looked at me seriously for a long time. We'll split the property equally. We're both adults. Let's leave each other some dignity. Kai's eyes were red. And he gritted his teeth and said, I won't divorce you. Ophelia was persuading him. Don't get angry and ruin your health. Yes, Kai would get dizzy when he was angry. I knew it better than Ophelia. Don't you care about me at all? But I know very well that men's bad nature will be fully exposed when their lies are exposed. Where haven't I treated you well? Which of your daily necessities isn't provided by me? Why can't you just turn a blind eye? Why do women always care about love and affection? After so many years of marriage, these feelings of love have long been worn away. It's normal for men to play around outside. You should know what kind of business I'm doing and how big it is. So many people are like me. And they're still okay. Why can't we be okay? Kai pursed his lips. Pearl, haven't I treated you well? It's precisely because it was so good that it makes me sad now. We're different. Pearl is still the same Pearl. But Kai is no longer the Kai he was at 22. I left the community in a daze. Bella was waiting for me downstairs. She got half of Walter's property. The raspberry-colored Maserati looked rather delicate in a way that didn't match her age. Just cry if you want to. We're women. It's no big deal to cry. She sighed. We're just too strong-willed. We refuse to shed tears and let those vixens outside laugh at us. We can't lose our dignity no matter what. But men are just like that. They always think that their wives at home are too proud and won't lower their heads. How could they know that we don't owe them anything? Those people outside got some benefits from them. They got them for free. So of course, they'll be gentle and flattering. But we're different. Even if he has just $1, half of it should be ours. I took the tissue that Bella handed me. Do you know what makes me sad? He could still bring me the sweet lotus root that I love on his way back from his affair. He knows my likes and dislikes. He knows how sad and heartbroken I'll be. But he still did it. What's more, he even clearly told Ophelia that no one could replace my position. I'll give you time to calm down. Kai didn't agree to the divorce. He tore the agreement into pieces and begged me to calm down. Saying so, he moved out of the house. Maybe you don't want to see me now. I sent Ophelia to my mother's house and looked at Kai seriously and calmly. I thought his reaction would be more intense, but Kai didn't. He just met my gaze with a kind of cruel calmness. I'm very calm. Divorce is the best choice. Kai shook his head. I know you're angry. We can talk about it later. I've already made up my mind. Kai interrupted what I was going to say next. Do we have to divorce? Yes. Kai pushed the suitcase. I'll move out to live elsewhere. We had the fiercest quarrel ever. I shouted at Kai hoarsely. Where are you going? Are you blatantly going to that bitch's house? Kai looked at me in disbelief. As if he got to know me again after such a long time. Pearl, you're acting like a shrew now. In the past, when I comforted Bella, I always told her not to be so irritable and to keep a little dignity for herself. Bella told me that no matter how fierce we were, it was just at home behind closed doors. Outsiders didn't know. Cheating wasn't all the fault of those vixens. Men were more to blame. They couldn't bear the loneliness, broke their vows, and took the initiative to offer the olive branch. So they deserved to be slapped. I rushed up and slapped Kai. Yes, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. I'm a shrew. You forced me to become a shrew. You could pretend to love me while having an affair. You could buy me the sweet tossment, this lotus root that I love on your way back from your affair. I even thought about giving you another chance. But what did you say? You said that there had been no love between us for a long time. You made me feel like an idiot. A big idiot. Kai, having fulfilled my desire. Tell me, if you love her, then what were these years between us? What were they? Kai took a few steps back. He wanted to say something, but his lips moved without saying anything in the end. I asked him, when did it start? January 25th. It was last year. So it started so long ago. That day, Kai came back very late, smelling of alcohol. He took out a velvet box from his suit pocket, and inside was a diamond bracelet. He even put it on me with his own hands. People are really strange. At this moment, I could still remember the touching surprise at that time and deceive myself into thinking that it would be okay, if he could just keep lying to me. Why didn't he lie to me? He had already lied for so long. The frank negotiation after cheating is like cutting open the innocent party's flesh layer by layer, exposing even the bones nakedly in the air. Breathing is filled with the sweet smell of blood, and every beat of the heart takes all the strength. Kai, this is a matter of principle. Yes. He lowered his head. Finally, I could see the emotion of admitting his mistake on his face. What if I say no? Pearl. Kai called my name. Give me a chance. Kai wasn't in a hurry. He gently tapped the table with his fingers. You were all my dreams when I was young. Everything I did was for you. I've suffered a lot. Even when I think about it in the middle of the night, I still grit my teeth. Just for the sentence. I want to let Pearl live a good life. How could I be willing to divorce? How could I be willing to let you leave me? He's much taller than me. When Kai hugged me, I didn't even reach his chin. Promises only count when there's love. When there's no love, they become empty words. Even the hardships he suffered are counted on you. Look, if it weren't for you, how could I have suffered so much? So this is what men who cheat think. So not wanting a divorce is because of unwillingness. I carried all his dreams when he was young. I used to be his first love, and now I'd become the white rice grain on his chest. But even so, he wouldn't let go because he didn't have the energy to go through the process of another marriage again. Nor could he find someone who would wholeheartedly raise the children. And all the social circles he had built were already familiar with his original wife. It would be too troublesome to start all over again. What's more, we already knew each other well enough. Lovers can be there for entertainment, but they're definitely not as considerate as the original wife. So let's keep pulling each other like this. When all the passion fades away, we'll truly be able to live without distractions. Like business partners. The most familiar strangers. Lovers who are still connected even when bones are broken. But not lovers anymore. Kai held my hand. His eyes were really beautiful. Full of affection at a glance. Pearl. Hit me. You'll feel better if you do. Men are really heartless. After they don't love anymore, they have countless ways to force you to compromise. Kai cut off all my cards. He was telling me that after being a housewife for these years, I had become a daughter flower that could only depend on him. Don't try to fight against him. I lay calmly on the bed. Kai hugged me and said again and again, Pearl, be obedient. I won't leave you. No matter what the process is. I'll definitely come back to you in the end. I closed my eyes and had an unexpectedly good sleep. When I woke up the next day, Kai had already left. He thoughtfully prepared seafood porridge simmering in a casserole for me. He also left a note. I know you're in a bad mood. There's 500 pounds and yuan in the card. Buy something to cheer yourself up. Think carefully about what I said and whether it's the best choice. Pearl. We're meant to be entangled for a lifetime. I couldn't let my stomach go hungry. I drank the seafood porridge and contacted the bank to withdraw all the 500 pounds and yuan from the card. I gave in to Kai. I'm not angry anymore. Kai laughed on the other end of the phone. You should be angry. It's my fault. Ophelia was whispering something beside him and was scolded by Kai. He continued to ask me, why did you withdraw 500,000 yuan at one time? I've taken a liking to a car that costs 6 million yuan. Husband. Will you buy it for me? Seeing me acting sly, Kai was in a very good mood. With a wave of his hand, he transferred the remaining money into my account. I could hear his sigh. That's good. Pearl. I contacted Bella. I have 17% of the shares of Ming Chen. Do you want them? I ransacked the house for all the valuable things. Turned them into cash. And deposited them into my account. I want to completely draw a clear line from Kai. Since he's unwilling to sign, let him have a good time outside. He'll regret it one day. I took Ophelia and got on the plane to another city. The child was too young to understand and was crying his heart out, but he also sensed something was wrong and tentatively asked me, Mom, are we not going to have Dad anymore? Adults may be able to part ways, but for children, the role of a father is indispensable. Because of Ophelia, I can never completely break off with Kai in this lifetime. I can only wait for him to compromise. I stroked Ophelia's head to comfort him. No matter what, Dad loves Ophelia. We're just giving each other some space and calming down a little. Ophelia pouted. Are you getting divorced? He buried his head in my arms. I hope Mom will be happy. I always thought that children didn't understand anything. But in fact, they know everything. The person Kai hurt the most wasn't me, but Ophelia. I called Ophelia. She called me Sister Pearl nervously, with a sobbing tone in her voice. Sorry, Sister Pearl. I didn't mean it. I'm just too in love with Kai. I sighed, thinking to myself how tired she must be to keep pretending like this. Stop pretending. I'm looking for you for something serious. Yes. Please tell me. You know that Kai and I are getting divorced, right? Ophelia's breathing became obviously rapid. I'm sorry. What's the use of saying sorry now? I just want a divorce and let Kai sign the divorce agreement. The position of Mrs. Kai will be yours. You should seize the opportunity. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. And then Ophelia slowly said okay. Let the two of them deal with it. During the days when I'm outside with Ophelia, I'm going to have a great time. The women outside are gentle and obedient. But when they make a fuss, they're much more difficult to deal with than the original wife. The next day wasn't a good day. It was pouring rain. And the rising fog blurred the street view. When Kai called, I hadn't woken up yet. I squinted and looked out of the window, feeling as if a lifetime had passed. Kai's voice was low, with a bit of a sobbing tone. On such a rainy day, his legs should be hurting. I always used to prepare hot water, towels, and ointment for him. I would apply the ointment on his knees, wrap them with plastic film, then put a towel on them, and soak his calves in hot water. Only in this way could the unbearable pain be relieved and let Kai have a good sleep. Back then, having facade by side, we had no money at all, and the foreman refused to prepay the salary. Kai was hit by an electric bike on his way home. The person who hit him saw that he was young, so he neither took him to the hospital for an examination nor contacted the traffic police. He just threw 200 yuan and left. Kai used the 200 yuan to buy spicy hot pot and fried skewers. Afraid that I would find the injury on his leg, he pulled his jeans down again and again. He didn't take a day off and went to the construction site early the next day. Over time, his legs got a problem. Whenever it was a rainy day, the pain was unbearable. Pearl, my legs hurt. What's the use of telling me this now? Kai, from the moment you chose Ophelia, I've no obligation to take care of you anymore. Our relationship as husband and wife ended at that moment. Do you know that? Kai paused for a moment and gave a bitter smile. Pearl, don't be angry. Okay? I'll come to find you. Kai came very quickly as if he had truly realized his mistake. I refused to see him, so he stood in the rain for the whole afternoon. His injured leg kept trembling. His face was as pale as paper. And he called my name in a hoarse voice. Pearl. He was soaked through. And his weak appearance made Ophelia burst into tears. Kai had grasped my weakness firmly. He used a pitiful and aggrieved tone to call Ophelia. Ophelia, please coax Mom and ask her not to be angry with Dad anymore. And Ophelia came over and hugged my arm, shaking it constantly. Mom, Dad is sick. Let him come in. Seeing Ophelia crying so hard that she could hardly catch her breath, I couldn't help but soften my heart. I took an umbrella and walked outside. Kai was overjoyed and quickly came up to meet me. But the moment he touched me, he timidly withdrew his hand. He was so cautious, as if he were the most affectionate man in the world. He looked at me with his wet eyes. And his way of speaking was cautious and humble. Pearl, please forgive me. I've cut off all ties with Ophelia. I sighed and said, come in first and we'll talk about it. I poured a cup of hot tea for Kai. He sat there uneasily, constantly rubbing the bath towel. He hardly dared to look me in the eye. After hesitating several times, he said, Pearl, what should I do to go back to how we were before? A broken mirror can't be made whole again. I've already decided to get a divorce. Kai rushed up and held my hand. What if I say I'm willing to have the property notarized? My heart skipped a beat. Is this the guarantee you're giving me? Kai nodded, with a bitter smile on his face. As long as you're willing to give me a chance, I'll do anything. When I carried all my luggage and returned to that magnificent villa again, Bella almost knocked my head off. She reproached me with a sense of disappointment. Pearl, can't you be a bit more ambitious? Can't you live without a man? You have so much cash in your hand. Are you afraid of starving to death? Besides, you're not bad looking. Are you afraid you won't find another man? I lit a mint cigarette. I had secretly learned to smoke with Bella after finding out that Kai was having an affair. When we got together and relaxed, we would light one up. It seemed that the bitter smoke filling our lungs could sweep away our melancholy. I can live without a man. But not without money. Bella turned her head and glanced at me. Huh? Kai and I had the property notarized. Although it's only real estate, it's still a large sum of money. Tomorrow, I'll officially enter the company and start working again. You hold 17 of the shares in Ming Chen. That makes you the fourth largest shareholder and gives you the right to decide on the appointment of the board of directors. At that time, I'll sell part of these properties and buy the copyright from the minority shareholders. Then I'll re-enter the company. So I'm back not because I can't bear to part with Kai. I have to plan a good future for Ophelia and myself. Bella was silent. After a long while, she asked me, when are you going to sell these real estates? I lowered my eyes. Every word I said felt like a stab in my heart. When Kai can't hold back and goes to see Ophelia. In the past 2 months, Kai's performance had been impeccable. Our life seemed to have really returned to normal, as if Ophelia had never existed. But I knew in my heart that this was just the calm on the surface. Beneath the surface, there were undercurrents. On this day after work, Kai brought me a champagne rose. The man clung to me affectionately and called my nickname eagerly. However, I knew that he was a bit absent-minded. Kai had always been a calm person. There was no reason for him to be so impatient. It could only mean that he had something on his mind that he couldn't hide, so he was flustered. I pressed his shoulder and said with a smile, I've made an appointment with Bella to go for a beauty treatment. Stop bothering me. Kai suddenly relaxed and softly leaned on my shoulder. All right. When will you be back, honey? Around 10 o'clock. Remember to take Ophelia to have dinner. Kai agreed easily. Or rather, he had been waiting for the right moment all along. Perhaps neither of us had expected that the two of us, who had trusted each other so much in the past, would reach the point of scheming against each other like this today. Sitting in Bella's car, the private detective sent me the photos he had taken. Ophelia was standing there, crying softly and weakly. Kai stroked her head and gently wiped away her tears. There was nothing really scandalous in the pictures, but it was enough to break my heart. Bella said that she remembered when we first met. Kai was working under Walter. Walter was a carefree person and spoke without restraint. When he was drunk, he said that I was stingy and a vengeful person. If Kai did anything to betray me, I would surely make him pay a heavy price. Kai was so confident back then. He said that he would never betray you in his life. I was so envious. I hid those photos well. They would all be evidence for filing for divorce in the future. Ophelia's place to live, food, and clothes would all have to be taken back with these. Help me contact the buyers. Bella said yes. At 10 o'clock in the evening, Kai was at home, behaving himself. When he saw me come back, he took the initiative to give me a kiss. It seemed that they hadn't had time to be affectionate. I rejected his kiss. Perhaps my action was too cold. Kai was a bit stunned. He looked at me disappointedly. As nervous as a child. What's wrong, Pearl? Nothing. I looked at Kai and suddenly wanted to give him a chance. Maybe he had just gone to see Ophelia to say goodbye today. Maybe they really had nothing going on anymore. Is there anything you're hiding from me? Kai shook his head. No. He struggled to say a few words. I just suddenly feel like you're about to leave me. He wasn't telling the truth. The balance in his heart had already tilted. I was no longer in the most important position. Our fate had come to an end. I sued Ophelia first, demanding that she, as the third party, return the couple's joint property, including the house, car, and jewelry that Kai had bought for her. On the day of the court hearing, Kai came. He sat far away from me, and his look at me was also very cold. Pearl, I feel like I don't even know you anymore. He said that I was plotting against him and that he had never expected that I was such a scheming person. What I did directly confirmed the evidence of his affair, which was a condition for filing for divorce later. I've already broken up with her. What exactly do I have to do to make you satisfied? I didn't know either. I only knew that from then on every day and night we spent together he was thinking of another person in his heart. She was his red rose. his cinnabar mole. And I became his plain rice. His wife who had shared hardships with him. I was his compromise. Something he was reluctant to accept. I wanted to be tough. But as soon as I opened my mouth I choked up and couldn't say a word. I want the Kai who had eyes only for me when he was 22. Kai was stunned and didn't say anything more. But he still didn't agree to the divorce. It didn't matter. If he didn't agree to the divorce, then we would torture each other. I sold some of my real estates and bought some shares from the minority shareholders. With Bella's cooperation I easily got into the company's inner circle. When Kai saw me, he didn't get angry. He just ignored me like I ignored him. In winter, our hometown was going to be demolished. The owner of the old house needed to go back to sign and stamp. Kai and I went back to our hometown. There were ice chips on the ground and it was very slippery. Kai walked behind me and subconsciously supported me. Because of the muddy road, the snow had melted and frozen, making the ground muddy. The car couldn't drive in. And we had to walk a long way. When I was a kid and went to the fields with Kai to cut grass, I never thought this road was so long. At that time, I just felt that I had endless things to talk about with him. We had so much fun arguing and joking around. Later, when we grew up, some budding feelings grew and I felt that the road was so short. It didn't take long to finish walking it. I wished it could go on forever so that I could talk more with him. Now, why did it feel so long? Probably because of my unwillingness. Probably because I couldn't let go of my grudges. Kai and I were living separately. We were just one certificate away from getting divorced. The mud made my boots very dirty, and there were mud spots all over my jeans. Kai subconsciously walked in front of me, squatted down and said he would carry me on his back. Then he awkwardly got up and patted his legs. I forgot that you hate me now. I shook my head. I don't hate you. Then why did you come to the company? You want to ruin my reputation. Don't you? I'm not young anymore. I'm no longer afraid of getting my clothes dirty with mud because my heart has been dirtier. No, I'm just taking back what I deserve. The company that Kai and I built from scratch should have half of it belonging to me. As for Ophelia, from the moment she stepped into my family, being condemned by thousands of people was the result she deserved. It wasn't me who made her embarrassed. It was her own wrongdoing. After walking a bit further, we could see the dilapidated old house. I hadn't been back to my hometown for many years. The old house was already overgrown with weeds. Many bricks had fallen off, and the window of the room where I used to live was gone. Kai and I stood there quietly for a while. By next year, the old house would also be demolished. There were really few memories left between us. He said gloomily, "I'm sorry. I had already let go enough. There's nothing to be sorry about." Ophelia was sent back to her hometown by her parents. You don't have the real estate property rights. In the company, I'm on an equal footing with you. After the divorce, I'll take half of your property. I'm already satisfied. Kai stroked the windowsill, and the falling wall plaster rubbed his hands all gray. He called my name, but I didn't respond to him. I just vaguely saw that summer when I was 19. Kai was lying by the window and asked me, "Pearl, are you hungry?" The end. The day before the class reunion, Ford's first love came back. He looked cold and said to me in an unhurried manner, "It's not as important as your birthday. I'm not going." The day before the class reunion, Ford's first love came back. He looked cold and said to me in an unhurried manner, "It's not." When I arrived, I happened to see him pinning his first love against the wall. Like a devout believer, he kissed the corner of her mouth reverently. I admit that when I saw this scene, even though I had been prepared for it, my heart still skipped a beat for a brief moment. Ford didn't seem to notice me. He was still carefully holding Julie's cheeks and gently kissing the corner of her mouth. It was as if a humble believer had finally obtained the goddess he had admired for a long time. I had been with him for 8 years, from graduation from university until now. He had never been so obsessed with me. The suffocating feeling in my chest hit me hard. I took a deep breath slowly to maintain my sanity. "Ford." My voice was dry and hoarse, not pleasant at all. When it rang out on the balcony, it was like that of a tactless onlooker who had offended the lady and the gentleman. And finally, Ford noticed me. His body froze slightly, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he raised his hand to straighten Julie's somewhat messy collar, as if to prevent her from being exposed. Julie's cheeks still had a faint blush of shyness, and her delicate and beautiful eyes didn't look at me. It seemed that she wasn't surprised at all by my appearance. I knew that because from the moment I walked in, Julie had already seen me. "Why are you here?" Ford turned around to look at me. Those usually clear and cold eyes of his were now filled with hidden and repressed passion, but it wasn't for me. His tone didn't show the slightest bit of panic. Instead, he even seemed a bit impatient. It was as if he was blaming me for disturbing their sweet moment. I felt a sharp pain in my heart, so intense that I could hardly breathe. "Shouldn't I be here?" After a long while, I asked in a hoarse voice, trying my best to suppress my emotions. The pouring rain outside had made my carefully done makeup look a mess, like a pitiful wretch. I had waited at the dining table for him for 4 hours. Just because Ford had said that he would come back to celebrate my birthday with me today. But I waited from day to night, only to receive a message from an old classmate. I closed my eyes and a sarcastic smile curled up at the corners of my mouth. When I learned that Julie had returned to China, I began to feel restless and uneasy in my heart. The day before the reunion, I carefully probed Ford. I asked him if he would go to this reunion. It wasn't until Ford gave me the answer I expected that my hanging heart finally settled down. Perhaps my expression was too painful. Ford frowned and finally walked towards me with big strides. But Julie grabbed his sleeve. Julie looked at him, with a hint of shy apology in her eyes. "Ford, could you take me home first?" The classmates at the reunion noticed that the atmosphere here was not right and gathered around to watch. But they all stopped in surprise, their eyes full of curiosity. Ford looked at me and hesitated for a moment. He didn't agree immediately. Julie then looked at me and said softly, "Sorry, Sister Christine. I'm drunk and really don't dare to go home alone." Her tone was very sincere, but there was a faint look of contempt and provocation in her eyes when she looked at me. Perhaps thinking of something, Ford clenched his fingers hanging by his side. He didn't look at me again, and his cold voice rang out gently, "Okay, I'll take you. This time I won't let you be in danger again." I watched their leaving backs and didn't even dare to look at the teasing eyes of the people around me. I knew what they were thinking. Compared with Julie, I was too ordinary. Or rather, Julie was so dazzling that even if Ford abandoned me, who had been with him for 5 years, it seemed understandable. After all, in college, Ford wasn't the only one who regarded Julie as his first love, and I was just an ordinary girl living in her shadow. I chased after Ford, and Ford chased after Julie. We formed a stable love triangle. None of us was willing to give up. It wasn't until Julie went abroad for further studies after graduation that I seemed like a scheming person who had managed to take her place. I still remember the day Julie went abroad. Ford was drunk out of his mind. He held my hand and asked me if I was willing to stay with him. That day, my heart was pounding like a drum. Like a moth willing to sacrifice itself in the fire. In the following 5 years, Ford's career advanced by leaps and bounds. He was so nice to me that everyone said I was really lucky. But only I knew that on every sleepless night, I was always afraid that Julie would come back and take everything away. After all, it would be easy for her to do so. When I got home, the heavy rain soaked me completely. The cake on the dining table still had candles on it. I lit the candles and celebrated my birthday by myself. Ford didn't come back that night. I didn't even dare to think about what he would do with Julie that night. Among these old classmates, Ford was the most successful one. His company was about to go public. He was outstanding among his peers in terms of social status, money, and appearance, and on the day Julie came back, someone told me Julie was cheated when she got married abroad. The man she married was a fake rich second generation. She didn't find out until after getting married. Julie fought lawsuits with that man for several years in order to get a divorce. Until now, she had nothing left. She came back to China in a sorry state. In the early morning of the next day, Ford came back. His handsome face still showed the tiredness after a hangover. When he saw the untouched cake on the table, his eyes were in a trance for a moment. I was wearing pajamas and looked at him blankly. Didn't you say you would celebrate my birthday with me? Don't you want to explain? Actually, there was no need for an explanation anymore, but I still couldn't give up. Ford tugged at his tie, and his cold voice rang out indifferently. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. An old classmate happened to invite me. It was hard to decline. He took off his suit jacket, walked over with big strides, and then skillfully lowered his head, wanting to kiss me, but I avoided it. I looked at him with a cold expression. Ford tightened his jaw and explained, I was drunk yesterday and not very sober. This was his explanation for that devout kiss yesterday. Can I celebrate your birthday with you today? He looked at my pale face and quickly added another sentence. But I sneered and said, is the hickey on your neck also because you were drunk? The hickey hadn't turned purple yet. It had been there for less than 3 hours. Ford's face changed. He frowned as if he didn't want to talk about this with me. It was just an accident. He pulled me into his arms, rubbed the back of my head and comforted me. I won't be with her, Christine. I told you that a long time ago. I love you. I didn't push him away. When my clothes were unbuttoned, I saw the ugly and hideous scar on my hand. It was a scar that had been difficult to heal for years. How much did I love Ford? Probably this scar could prove it. Back then, when Julie was taken advantage of when she was drunk, Ford rushed forward recklessly to fight with those people. Unexpectedly, there were some desperados among those people. They drew their knives and slashed at Ford, and perhaps I was also a desperado who wasn't afraid of death for the sake of love. I blocked that knife for Ford, but over the years, Ford only remembered Julie's heartbroken expression when she cried that night. He didn't remember at all that I covered my bloody and mangled arm and wailed in pain that night. Perhaps to make it up to me, Ford put off all his work the next day and held a birthday party for me. The people at the party were colleagues from work and old classmates from university. I didn't resist. I pulled myself together and chose to accept his compensation. But to my surprise, the first person I saw when I opened the door was Julie. She was dressed beautifully and was the focus of the whole place just by sitting there. Everyone was attracted to her. At this party, she was as dazzling as the protagonist. And I, standing beside her, was dull like a foil. Happy birthday, Sister Christine. She smiled like a flower, with clear eyes. My expression froze for a moment. After a long while, I just nodded at her. After sitting down, I didn't dare to look into Ford's eyes. I was afraid that when I was looking at him, his eyes were looking at Julie. Julie was sitting beside me. When she toasted me, maybe it was accidental or on purpose, she spilled all the wine on my coat. Sorry, Sister Christine. Her tone was full of apology, but there was only malice in her eyes. She said, Sister Christine, take off the dirty clothes quickly. Don't stain the clothes inside. Julie was sitting beside me. When she toasted me, maybe it was accidental or on purpose, she spilled. Take it off, Christine. Ford took off his coat and intended to give it to me. The people around were also persuading me to take off the clothes stained with wine. I finally took it off, even though my expression was cold. When I heard the gasps of the people around me suddenly stop, my heart still trembled uncontrollably. How disgusting! Someone exclaimed subconsciously. Julie also covered her mouth and said softly, hasn't this scar faded yet? It's so ugly. I heard her add in a low voice. It was very quiet, and only I could hear this malicious comment. There was a man at the wine table who was obviously drunk. Looking at the scar I exposed, he showed a disgusted expression and shouted loudly, damn it, it's so disgusting. Ford, how could you sleep with her? Give it to me. I'm going to throw up. I felt a bit embarrassed. I quickly put on the coat that Ford handed to me. Ford's expression was as cold as ever, as if he could handle everything with ease no matter what happened, including my being humiliated in public, but I still underestimated his love for Julie. Or rather, I overestimated my position in his heart. The drunk man then turned his eyes to Julie. There was a bit of lewdness and contempt in his eyes. Was your husband abroad a white guy? Ha ha ha. Serves you right for worshipping foreign things and getting cheated. Of course, being beautiful is good. Even if you've been fucked by others until they're tired of you, you can still come back and find your old lapdogs to take you in. Ha ha ha. From the moment he said the first sentence, I saw the veins on Ford's forehead bulge. Until the last sentence was out. It seemed that he could no longer maintain his apparent calm. He stood up with a gloomy face, picked up the wine bottle on the table and smashed it hard. The scene immediately became chaotic. Julie's eyes were red and she was crying softly, calling Ford's name. Ford's arms were tense and he was like an angry wolf, punching and kicking the drunk man madly without caring about anything. I stood there in a daze and a chill crept up my spine. It was really cold. I stood up but didn't know what to do. My boyfriend was fighting with someone but not for me. Now only Julie was qualified to say, "Stop fighting." In the panic, the chandelier on the roof was hit by a wine bottle and fell to the ground, shattering into pieces of glass all over the floor. The hotel waiter shouted that he would call the police if they didn't stop. My heart skipped a beat. Ford's company was about to go public. If during this period the company's president ended up in prison because of a fight, it would definitely have an incalculable impact. "Don't call the police." I hurriedly grabbed Ford's arm, trying to make him stop. But his eyes were already red and it was obvious that he had been provoked and was full of fighting spirit. He forcefully shook off my hand and shouted without looking back, "Don't fucking touch me." I was thrown to the ground and happened to land on the broken chandelier. There seemed to be something soft behind me that cushioned my fall, but I didn't pay attention because a sharp pain shot through my wrist. I stared blankly at the blood flowing on the ground. My previously intact wrist now had a bloody cut on it, at a position similar to the other wrist. It was so cold. Really cold. Colder than the other one. My tears couldn't be held back and seemed to flow out uncontrollably. Finally, my crying reached Ford's ears. He froze in place as if he had just come to his senses at that moment. "Christine." His voice was full of panic as he staggered towards me. I was sent to the hospital. Ford followed me into the ward. He was pale-faced and looked at my arm with his lips pursed. "I'm sorry. I didn't notice it at that time." I didn't say anything and just quietly watched the doctor treat my wound. There were a lot of glass shards in it, and the doctor said that this scar would be difficult to heal. I curled my lips and smiled gently. "Then just don't let it heal." "Ford, let's break up," I said softly to Ford. Once I thought that if I broke up with Ford one day, the scene would definitely be me crying bitterly while Ford remained cold and indifferent. But now that this day had really come, I found that many things had changed. For example, I was the one who brought up the breakup. I looked very calm. On the contrary, Ford's expression was very unstable. His chest heaved up and down, and his handsome face changed expression several times. Finally, he frowned and suppressed the impatience in his tone. "Christine, I said I wouldn't be with Julie. I didn't notice what happened today. You can be angry with me, but don't make such a fuss." He stood up as if he didn't want to talk more about this issue with me. I knew that he was sure that I wouldn't be willing to leave him. He thought I was just making a scene and losing my temper. But I clearly knew that I no longer intended to love him. Perhaps there was an urgent matter at the company, or perhaps there was an urgent matter with Julie. Ford left my ward. I didn't care anymore. After the wound on my arm was treated, I asked the doctor which ward the other man who was sent in with me today was in. When I was thrown to the ground, I clearly realized that someone behind me had blocked for me. Otherwise, with all that broken glass on the floor, it wouldn't have been just my arm that got hurt. After getting an accurate reply, I walked into the adjacent ward. When I pushed the door open, I paused slightly. I hesitated and said, "Brian?" The man on the hospital bed was pale-faced and had delicate features. Hearing my voice, he weakly opened his eyes and looked at me, then showed a gentle and kind smile. "Senior Christine, has the wound on your arm been treated?" Brian's injury was much more serious than mine. Or rather, almost all of the broken glass on the floor had stabbed into his body. Now he was lying weakly on the hospital bed and could hardly get out of bed. I squeezed my hand and looked at him apologetically. "Thank you. How could you?" There wasn't enough time to think. I just rushed over. Brian coughed twice softly and seemed to have pulled his wound again. He frowned, looking a bit pained. I felt even more guilty in my heart. "Senior Christine, Could I ask you for a favor? Brian smiled at me a bit sheepishly. I'm on a business trip to Nanchang and don't know anyone here. Could I borrow your charger? Sure. I looked at his delicate, somewhat feminine cheeks and felt both guilty and a bit puzzled in my heart. Brian was a junior of mine in college. My acquaintance with him probably started when I showed him around to find classrooms at the beginning of the semester. There were also some reminders from a senior to a junior. So, I was really grateful that he had rushed to save me without hesitation. Now that he was lying on the hospital bed unable to take care of himself and there was no one to take care of him, I naturally wouldn't just leave like this. I told him that I would take care of him in the next few days. Brian's expression seemed very pleasantly surprised. There was also a hint of a smile that I didn't quite understand. I took Brian's clothes that needed to be washed back home. This house was bought by Ford and me. But I had another house. Since we had already broken up, I didn't plan to live here anymore. I contacted the moving company and made an appointment for the time. Then I washed Brian's clothes by hand and hung them on the balcony. I waited until the next day when Ford came back. He noticed the clothes on the balcony that didn't belong to him at first glance. When I came out of the room, I saw him sitting on the sofa without saying a word. His usually handsome and indifferent face was now gloomy. He was very tense all over. Hearing my voice, he raised his head. His dark eyes were full of suppressed anger. Christine, there's no need to do this. He curled his lips and his tone was somewhat sarcastic. I walked past him indifferently, planning to take down that piece of clothing, but after just taking a couple of steps, I was suddenly pushed against the wall by Ford, who had stood up. He gritted his teeth and said with difficulty, "Are you trying to make me jealous with another man?" I looked at him coldly. "Ford, we've already broken up." Ford laughed. "So, on the first day after the breakup, you're already with another man?" I pushed his shoulders and frowned slightly. "Let go." Ford was about to say something else when the phone ringing in his pocket interrupted him. He took it out and glanced at it, and then his body froze slightly. I saw that the caller was Julie. Ford answered the phone. Almost just a few seconds passed. I couldn't hear what Julie said, but I could clearly see the worry and panic on Ford's face. After hanging up the phone, Ford's expression became hesitant. After a while, he let out a long sigh. "Christine, she said she was being followed on the road. You know I can't just stand by and do nothing." My eyes remained cold. Ford hesitated for a moment and then added, "Besides, she's now working in my company. She's also my employee." I finally laughed. "Get out of here," I said. Ford left. To be honest, looking at his back, there was no longer any turmoil in my heart. Perhaps I had really given up on him. I put away the clothes and went to the hospital. But unfortunately, when I arrived, there were other people in Brian's room. My steps stopped at the door, and just as I was about to knock, I heard my name coming from inside the room. "Do you still like Christine?" "Yeah, I can't forget her." But I saw Julie came back. She and Ford are probably about to break up soon. After all, everyone knows that Julie came back this time to find Ford to take over. You should seize the opportunity. Maybe you can succeed this time. I hope so. I just hope she can live a better life. I froze at the door and couldn't come to my senses for a while. Brian liked me? How could he like me? Footsteps sounded in the room. I hurriedly backed away, but it was already too late. The door of the ward was opened, and Brian on the bed and I looked at each other. The air was silent for an instant. Neither of us said anything. After the third person left, I pretended to be normal and walked in. "I brought you some soup." Brian looked at me and didn't say anything. When I sat down, he said, "Senior, you heard it all." My body stiffened a bit and I could only nod. "Senior, I do like you indeed." He lowered his eyes as if he had finally been liberated. "I've liked you for a long time. I liked you since the beginning of my freshman year. At that time, you were chasing Ford, and I was chasing you. Ford didn't notice you, and you didn't notice me. We were all like birds trapped in cages. I didn't dare to listen anymore. What do you like about me?" I suddenly asked. My voice was even louder than usual. Brian smiled. Senior, you've always been so dazzling. I was slightly stunned in my eyes and a strange emotion suddenly surged in my heart. I took half a step back and fled the hospital in a panic. During that period of time, I really only remembered Ford. I never thought that there was another person who had been firmly liking me all along. My eyes felt sour and the corners of my mouth curved slightly. It turned out that I wasn't that bad after all. The moving company I had arranged arrived. I transferred a sum of money from Ford's account. I planned to leave this house to him. I only told a few good friends about breaking up with Ford, but still, everyone found out. They didn't think that I had taken the initiative to break up. They just thought that Ford had abandoned me. After all, Julie had come back. And in Ford's company, almost everyone thought that Julie would be the future boss's wife. I didn't show any reaction to this. Whatever. On the second day after moving, Ford called me. It was only at this time that he really realized that when I said we should break up, I wasn't just saying it out of anger. Christine, I won't agree to break up with you. I know I've done something wrong, but you should at least give me a chance to make up for it. Listening to his urgent voice begging for reconciliation, for some reason, a sense of disgust grew in my heart. I knew that I really didn't love him anymore. Since that was the case, there was no need to say more. Don't bother me. I hung up the phone and hesitated as I looked at the chicken soup I had cooked beside me. When I went to the hospital, Ford started asking people everywhere to find out where I was. By the way, he also inquired whether there was another man around me. I didn't pay attention to him. When I stood at the door of the ward again, for some reason, I felt a bit nervous in my heart. After hesitating for a long time, I finally opened the door. Brian's expression visibly brightened when he saw me. He seemed to not expect that I would come again. The first thing he said was, "Senior, have you really broken up with Ford?" I didn't pause in my movements and nodded in response, "Yes." "Then you—" Brian wanted to say something but still didn't dare to speak out. He just looked at me with a hesitant expression. I didn't dare to think about what he meant, nor did I dare to respond to him. So I just said, "Is there anything else you want to eat?" Brian still kept looking at me. After a while, he lowered his eyes in disappointment. The atmosphere became a bit stiff. Just as I was about to say something to ease it, I heard Brian's voice that seemed to have returned to normal. "Senior sister, I can leave now." He took a while to stand up from the bed and then started walking with some difficulty in front of me. But he hadn't walked 2 steps before he tripped over a stool on the floor and fell down. I quickly rushed over to hold him. But the moment I held him, the door of the ward was opened. Ford's face was gloomier than I had ever seen. He seemed to have drunk some wine. At this time, his fists were clenched tightly and his eyes were fixed on my hands holding Brian. I glanced at him but didn't let go. Instead, I asked with concern, "How is it? Does it hurt?" Brian shook his head at me, looking a bit embarrassed. Ford seemed even angrier. That handsome and clear face showed no sign of calmness at all. He strode forward and pulled Brian away from my arms. Then he shouted angrily, "Is it because of him that you broke up with me?" I frowned as I looked at him. Brian's injury hadn't healed yet. However, my worried expression irritated Ford even more, especially when Brian provoked him with a sentence beside him, "So what if it is?" The two of them started fighting. Brian had just been able to stand up and walk and he was no match for Ford at all. I was really worried. "Let go. Ford, don't touch him." I stood up and tried to pull them apart, but Ford didn't give me any chance to stop them. I saw that the newly healed wound on Brian's body started bleeding again. My mind went blank for a moment. At this time, Ford picked up the stool beside him and was about to smash it on Brian's head. I subconsciously picked up the porcelain bowl beside me and smashed it hard on Ford's arm. Everything stopped. Ford looked at the bloody and mangled wound on his wrist and stared at me in disbelief. For the first time, I saw such a painful and aggrieved expression in his eyes. But I didn't look at him again. Instead, I urgently called the doctor and asked her to save Brian first. Brian gave me a pale smile. "Senior sister, thank you." I looked at the wounds on his body and felt a pang in my chest. "Why?" Ford's fragile voice rang in my ear. He didn't care about the wound on his arm but stubbornly asked me, "Why? Christine, why don't you love me anymore?" I finally turned around to look at him and said, "I also want to ask you, why? Since you still like Julie, why did you get together with me?" Ford was stunned for a moment. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, "Christine, I've told you long ago. I love you." I admit that when Julie came back, I did still have some feelings for her, but I really only love you. I was really drunk at the party that day. Whether you believe it or not. I wasn't angry because of her during that fight either. "Christine, could you please give me one more chance?" I saw the tears flowing from the corners of his eyes. I also heard the pain in his voice. But I didn't look back. The 2 scars on my wrist wouldn't heal. And my love had disappeared. For several consecutive days, I stayed in front of Brian's ward. I heard that Ford had fired Julie. He told Julie in front of everyone that he didn't love her. He hoped that she wouldn't pester him anymore. Yes. He had always known that Julie had come back to China to find him. I didn't pay attention to these things. I just regularly washed clothes and delivered meals for Brian every day until the last day. "Senior sister, are you really unwilling to give me a chance?" Brian tugged at my sleeve and his voice sounded a bit painful. "I really don't want to miss you again." I hesitated and didn't say anything. Starting a new relationship was undoubtedly a challenge for me. But I didn't know how to explain it to Brian. "Even if we're not together, could you just accept my love?" These words were so humble. Brian's eyes were red and he almost burst into tears. My heart suddenly trembled and I subconsciously nodded and said, "Okay." Brian smiled again, looking like a child who had got the treasure he had dreamed of. On the day Brian was discharged from the hospital, we unexpectedly met Julie. To my surprise, she looked completely different from her usual refined and elegant self. She looked haggard. When she saw me, there was no contempt in her eyes anymore. Instead, there was resentment. Later, I learned that Julie had been fired by Ford. All her financial sources were gone. So, she did something really stupid and bold. She stole the commercial secrets of Ford's company and sold them to a rival company. The money made her life much better. But it also brought her bigger troubles. Because Ford was suing her. If the lawsuit was successful, she would be sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. In that case, her life would be completely ruined. "What, are you feeling smug?" Julie snorted coldly and her voice was like poison shards. I looked at her coldly and said after a while, "A little bit." Julie's face twisted for a moment. She pinched the palm of her hand tightly with her fingertips. But she still couldn't control herself and shouted at me, "I wish you had been hacked to death that night. Then maybe Ford would still love me until today. And I wouldn't have to live such a wretched life." Brian frowned and took an unhappy step forward. But I held him back. I looked at Julie and suddenly smiled. "Don't you think you're just like a clown now?" Julie wanted to come forward and hit me, but she was worried about Brian beside me. And I didn't pay any more attention to her. It was probably on Valentine's Day. I had promised to go on a date with Brian. He excitedly picked out several new suits for himself and also carefully prepared a date gift. I also prepared a gift for him. But I didn't expect to meet Ford that day. He wasn't on a date with anyone. He was in the restaurant to ask someone for a favor. It was only at this time that I learned that his company's listing had failed. Because Julie had leaked the secrets, he now had to start all over again. I still remembered that he had drunk until he had a stomach hemorrhage during the initial stage of his entrepreneurship. I thought that he would never be in such a humble situation again in his life. Unexpectedly, things were unpredictable. He also saw me. And Brian beside me. Brian's hand was still around my waist. When he saw Ford, he deliberately tightened it a bit. I knew what he was worried about. To ease his worry, I turned my head and kissed him on the cheek. Brian was stunned for a moment and then he let go of his hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ford's reaction. He lowered his head as if to avoid looking and bent down in a bit of a mess to pick up the watch that had fallen on the floor. That watch was the one I had given him on Valentine's Day before. He carefully put the watch into his arms as if he was treating a precious treasure. But he was loudly scolded by the people at the wine table. That person seemed to be drunk and was saying all kinds of dirty words. Ford didn't say a word and just endured it silently. Just in a place where I couldn't see. Perhaps in the middle of the night. There were a few drops of tears on the watch. The scar on his wrist couldn't heal either. For me, it was because my love had disappeared. But for him, it was because his love was hard to fade away. I promised Brian that I would get engaged to him on the next Valentine's Day. I had thought about how to deal with this relationship. Finally, my decision was to follow my heart. I had a crush on Brian. I knew clearly what it felt like to have a crush on someone. Brian couldn't wait to announce it to the whole world. I knew that he had always been brooding over my relationship with Ford. He even wanted to invite Ford to our engagement. I stopped him, but Ford still came on the day of our engagement. Julie didn't. She was already in prison. Ford's company couldn't be saved for various reasons. I heard that he got drunk every day and became completely decadent. When I saw him, I realized that it wasn't just decadence. He had changed. Perhaps he would never be able to pick himself up again. Whether it was because of me or not, I didn't want to know. During this engagement banquet, I didn't look at him at all from the beginning to the end. Since the past was like smoke, let it go with the wind. I looked at Brian's smiling face and slowly smiled on my face too. I thought, may I meet a good person later in life.